Hello class, it's a new week and we are learning about qualitative research methods. So up to this point in the class we've been learning about quantitative research methods, and those are the methods that deal with numbers or measurements that yield numbers to be crunched or to be mathematically added to or formulated into responses. And so that's what we've talked about so far, is quantitative research methods, methods that yield numbers. Now we're moving into more about qualitative research methods, which are more about feelings or understandings. And this type of research is a very big change from what we've been learning so far. So this week you're going to be reading chapters 12, 13, and 14 on the three different or major qualitative research methods: narrative research, ethnographic research, and case study research. And then you'll be doing a discussion on research design, how it introduces us to the foundational processes. The discussion is about quantitative research methods. So it goes back into what we've been learning about already. And you're going to choose one of these methods that might work for you and what you think you'll be using for your research project. Which method of those will you be using? And then as you look into that and start to decide which method you want to be using for your proposal for this class, you'll want to look back at the chapter for that method so that you understand the ins and outs and the strengths and weaknesses of that method. Because again, there is an upcoming assignment next week where you'll be talking about this, what methods you plan to use and who are your participants and what instrument will you use and so forth. So have a good discussion on that in preparation for the assignment next week, and then of course there are the 3 quizzes for each of the chapters that you'll be reading on qualitative research methods. Now remember, those quizzes can be taken more than once. Some of you, I notice, have not been trying them again, and if you don't get a very good score the first time you take a quiz, it is worth taking it again. And even if you don't get a better score the second time, it will just the grade that you'll receive will be the highest quiz score that you get, whichever attempt you take. So that's the way that's set up for those quizzes. So let's look ahead a little bit just to show you what's coming up. There's a design, participants, and procedures assignment in which you will identify a research proposal as qualitative or quantitative, and then determine which type. And you have to be locked into a type. I lock you into one because this is your first chance to learn about research methods, so I want to make sure that you pick one and stick with it and follow it through to the end. So if it's quantitative, you're going to be looking at one of these 5 methods. If it's qualitative, you'll look at one of the 3 methods that we're learning about this week. And then you are going to include information about it. So tell me the type of research, the participants for your study, the instruments you want to use, the design, and the procedure. Or if it's qualitative, the type, participants, and data collection and procedure. So that's what is due, not till next week though, but just to give you a heads up that is due upcoming, and you'll want to make sure that you pick a research method in anticipation of this assignment. Also, I've been grading the proposal description that you submitted. And let's see, I didn't really look at the literature review section of that because, again, we did the preliminary literature review and I gave you pretty good feedback on that in the past already. But that preliminary literature review, you'll want to take a look at my feedback that I gave you last week on that so that you are able to update it for your final literature review too and follow my suggestions. And the final lit review is due in a couple of weeks, where you will need to add in the extra sources to make at least 15 in-text citations or references, I should say, in that. So keep reading articles, in your area of interest. The truth is, and this is why I have you do it this way, this is why the preliminary literature review is the first assignment that's major that's due in this class, is because that's how research studies emerge. You can't just come up with a research study based on something that you are interested in. You also have to look at the literature that is out there and what it says first. Because let's say you have an interest of an area, but it turns out that somebody has already answered that question in an article that they wrote or in a study that they did. So, and you go and do the study without knowing what was written about it already, well, that means that you did something you don't need to do. You repeated something. You reinvented the wheel, so to speak. So that's why research studies emerge. They emerge from literature reviews and also an interest area that you have and where those coincide. So you try to find the place where your interests add to the literature review, and then that's where you do your research study. So that's why I have you do that preliminary literature review, so you have a good direction to head with these assignments and your research proposal. Also, when you have an intro or big statements that you make in your papers, go ahead and back those up with studies. So a lot of you put an intro section to this assignment, this proposal description assignment. And in the intro, you make a lot of claims. Make sure that you add in some citations to those claims. So you might say, many people feel that self-regulation skills are very important to student success. You need to back that up, so you need to have just a list of, citations that you can add there, and you could add something like Smith 2010, semicolon, Johnson 2012. You can put a bunch of different sources that back up one single statement too in APA format, so that's possible as well. And those could be the same sources that you have later in your paper. So that's just something to be aware of too. And as we finish up our discussion on correlation versus causation, there are a lot of articles out there, and this is one that I found this last week that I thought was a good example of correlation. And it says here, America's New Tobacco Crisis. This is something I posted on Facebook and had a little discussion about, but it says, America's New Tobacco Crisis, the rich stopped smoking, the poor didn't. And so implied in this title even is a causation, right? It's saying that basically because someone is poor, maybe that's why they didn't stop smoking. And that could be the case, but if you read the article a little bit more, this is from Apple News, but it actually came from the Washington Post. If you read the article, there's actually not a causation statement made, and they do a good job in this. A lot of news articles aren't as good as this one actually, where they say that, oh, it's because people are poor that they're not smoking, or that they are still smoking. But because it's correlated, so the study was done and it found that rich people tended not to smoke, or that some stopped smoking and that poor people did not. It's correlated. That means that we don't know. So I put here, are they still smoking because they're poor, or are they poor because they're still smoking? See, it could be either way with correlation. Now, if we did an experimental study or a causal comparative study that compared people who were poor and smoking and all those things, we could make some claims that said that it's because that they are poor that they are still smoking. But because that's not the case here, we don't know the answer. We don't know. And actually, I put down here too, there were some comments that are kind of interesting, or is it some other factor that may or may not be related to poverty? We don't know because correlation, right? We don't know because it's a correlation study, and we don't want to be too strong on saying one thing causes the other. And this is done all the time in the media and in the news. They put together two different things saying, well, poor people tend to do this, or rich people tend to do this, or whatever tends to do this. But those are correlation studies, and so they always imply some kind of cause, but you can't say that there's a cause here necessarily, because it just correlates. So we don't know if they're still smoking because they're poor, or are they poor because they're still smoking, or is it some other factor that may not be related to poverty at all? And that's a correlation study. And so if you have that type of study that you propose to do, again, you won't know the answer of what causes what, but you will be able to just find links between things. So it's just kind of a good reminder about that whole concept of correlation versus causation, and how important it is to, I guess, differentiate the two concepts. And with this week moving into qualitative research methods, I just wanted to do a little presentation about this. So the first method that you'll be learning about this week is narrative research. And this is the study of how different humans experience the world around them. And in narrative research, the researcher collects descriptions of events through interviews and observations and synthesizes them into narratives or stories. And with narrative research, a unique element of this research is that the participants for the research usually just include one person or one group. It's not with quantitative research, you're trying to get as many people as you can, right? And add the numbers and so forth. But with qualitative research, it's more about a smaller group of people that you're working with. So narrative research has that unique element where you're maybe telling the story of just one individual who has a unique experience that is of interest. And narrative research example includes things like autobiographies or personal narratives or life histories or oral histories and those kinds of things. So those are examples of narrative research where we're telling the story of just maybe one person. Ethnographic research is a study of cultural patterns and perspectives of participants in their natural settings. So ethnographic research, whereas narrative research might just look at one person and their story, this ethnographic research looks at a culture or a group of people and their perspectives and cultural experiences in their natural settings. So characteristics of ethnographic research include long-term studies situated in a context. For instance, if you want to study the natives of the African plains, then you have to actually go there and be there for a long time, like probably a year or more, and being in their culture and observing and understanding them. So it includes intensive participant observation. That means you're part of their tribe, so to speak. You go native almost, right, with them. And your goal is to describe, analyze, and interpret the culture of a group. So that's ethnographic research. The last one is case study research, and this really is kind of a catch-all research study. It's hard to define and hard to it's just hard to define, hard to explain, but a qualitative research approach in which researchers focus on a unit of study known as a bounded system. So you just basically choose what this system is and who the people are within that system, and you're observing, you're interviewing, you're finding out information about their experiences and understandings and their experiences. So case study research has these characteristics. Obviously it's qualitative, it's focused on a bounded system, and that's kind of hard to define really, but you do need to choose what exactly system it is that you're studying. It's not necessarily a methodological choice, rather it's a choice of what to study, and it's an all-encompassing research method. Well, you'll read a lot more about each of these in this week's readings, but I wanted to give you a brief intro of each of them as well as kind of a nice mental organizer for you. And then as we look at moving from quantitative to qualitative research, these are some of the differences there. So qualitative research is going to be about stories and feelings, and quantitative research is about numbers and statistics. That's what we've talked about so far. Qualitative research usually values the participant's perspective, and quantitative research is trying to get to some objective reality, independent of any participant, or any single participant anyway. And I put objective in quotes there because it's sometimes hard to achieve that, or hard to say that you're completely objective. And a qualitative research might argue that you never are completely objective anyway, no matter how hard you try. Under qualitative, the methods that they use are interviews, observations, document analysis, and conversations, right? Conversations. And under quantitative, you have numerical measurements only, with instruments such as surveys, interviews, tests, etc. So both of them have interviews, but the interviews in a quantitative research study would be very different. It would be more of a numeric interview, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel today? And the qualitative interview would be more like asking people about their experiences. Qualitative has a small perspective, and it's not generally intended to be generalized. It's not the kind of study that says everyone should do this. Whereas quantitative is, you're trying to generalize your findings to a larger population. And then finally, qualitative has an emphasis on relationships with participants, right? There's a lot of talk and you'll be reading about this, where, what is your relationship with the participants in the interview? Are you part of their group? Are you not? Are you observing, outsider? And so forth. Whereas with quantitative, you avoid relationships with participants to help support objectivity. So they are two very different types of research, and you can choose either one for your research proposal. As you read about qualitative, if that really resonates with you, you can choose that, or if you want to go back to quantitative. Okay, well, good luck this week with your work. Have a good week.